صلوا على النور يا أحمد الله نور المنازل يا محمد
Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. They say just as our bodies need nourishment to survive, our souls need to be nourished as well. But the question is, how often do we feed our souls? Welcome to Soul Food, a podcast about spiritual refinement. My name is Amjad Tarsin, and I invite you to embark with me on this journey inward to work on our souls. Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to episode 11 of Soul Food, titled Generosity. In this episode, we're going to look at the dangers of selfishness. We'll talk about the beauty of generosity. And finally, we'll talk about the importance of having a generous heart. A sign of true spiritual growth is that you're able to overcome the selfish nature of your nafs. And it's becoming normal in today's world to just accept whatever the nafs wants. And that's the opposite of spiritual progress and growth. And our culture today attaches so many words to the word self in a positive way, whereas in the past it was almost always referred to negatively. So, for example, you hear words thrown around all the time like self-love and self-care and self-worth. And previously, there were negative connotations when we would call someone, for example, self-centered and selfish and self-serving. And one of the only ones that's positive in the English language, the way that we use the word self, is when we refer to someone who is selfless, which means that a person is generous and cares about things beyond his or her own self. But being selfish, it actually puts your ego at the center of existence. And this is something that has affected people even in the way that they see the world today. People in modern times, they've removed God from being the center of existence. The ultimate goal is seeking God, seeking the divine. And for someone who gives into this worldview, it takes them to very dark places. The nafs, as our tradition tells us, is worse than 70 devils. And the spiritual path is actually about subduing the nafs so that the soul can ascend and witness Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's perfection. And being generous opens you up to overcoming the veils of your nafs, to piercing through the veils of the nafs. And when someone is selfish, they're actually blinded and they're not able to see beyond themselves. And this brings us to the next point, the beauty of generosity. Being generous, being someone who is giving and caring about others, this is actually a trait that is beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the names of Allah is Al-Kareem, the most generous. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was the most selfless person. And he would give more freely than the wind, as his companions described him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's an amazing hadith that shows us the potential of what we can receive from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we're generous to others. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "As-sakhiyu qareebun min Allah, qareebun min al-jannah, qareebun min al-nas, ba'eedun min al-nar." The generous person, as-sakhi, one of the words for generosity, the generous person is close to Allah, close to paradise, close to people, and distant from the fire. Just think about that, close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, close to attaining paradise, and close to people, someone who cares about people and takes care of their needs. And people who are generous, they are loved and respected by all, It's a universal virtue. It's something that all people, no matter of their backgrounds, their cultures, their religious traditions, they all respect someone who is generous and giving to others. The hadith goes on talking about someone who's miserly. وَالْبَخِيلُ بَعِيدٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ بَعِيدٌ مِّنَ الْجَنَّةِ بَعِيدٌ مِّنَ النَّاسِ قَرِيبٌ مِّنَ النَّارِ. The miser is distant from Allah, distant from paradise, distant from people, and near to the fire. This is someone who's selfish and doesn't want to give to people in need, doesn't care about anyone else. That type of person is distant from Allah, distant from paradise and from people, because no one respects a miser. No one cares for a miser. That person will not be taken care of by others, especially when they're known to be people who never cared about anyone else in their lives, people who didn't go out of their way to help someone else. It's extremely unlikely that someone will think about them in their time of need. And the hadith says that that person is near to the fire. May Allah protect us. And the hadith goes on. The end of the hadith is as follows: وَالْجَاهِلُ السَّخِي أَحَبُّ إِلَى اللَّهِ مِنْ عَابِدٍ بَخِيلٍ. This is really powerful. The ignorant person who is generous is more beloved to Allah than a worshipful miser. The ignorant person who's generous is more beloved to Allah than a worshipful miser. Ignorance is a negative trait. This doesn't mean that it's okay to be ignorant. It is a negative trait, but because that ignorant person who might not be very knowledgeable has the spiritual virtue of generosity, that person becomes more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than someone who engages in a lot of devotion but is miserly. And that shows us the importance of having a generous heart. And this is the final point. Being generous with one's wealth is especially important. If you have excess wealth and you're able to help those in need, you're able to donate to good causes, you're able to take care of your loved ones, that is extremely virtuous and praiseworthy, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that. Simultaneously, we should also have generous hearts, because so many people today are lonely and hurting. There is a loneliness epidemic. People are going through all types of emotional turmoil, and genuinely caring for them and wanting good for them stems from having a generous heart. And some people, all they really need is someone to lend an ear and listen to them. They might not necessarily need you to solve their problems. They're just looking for that connection. They just want to know someone cares. And the Prophet ﷺ was generous in all the meanings of the word. He was generous with his wealth, and he would never go to sleep with even a single gold coin in his house. He would go out and find someone to give it to. He was generous with his time. Most of his time was spent teaching people, engaging with them, caring for them, that he was mixing with his Sahaba, young and old. He was generous with his heart, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he would make dua for people and he would want them to be guided, even those who treated him in the worst way. So he was general in the most universal sense of the word. And we need to be people who reflect that generosity. And it starts with having a generous heart, and then it manifests in our wealth, in our dealings with people, caring about them, serving them, taking care of their needs. But having a generous heart is the foundation and the starting place for all of that. And that's what the world needs. We have been devastated by the self-centered, selfish nature of our lives, that we're so cut off from one another that we have to be the agents of generosity. We have to be those beautiful reflections of the prophetic character and his beautiful way so that we can help and heal others. And this brings us now to the call to action. Find some way to give something today. It can be to a local mosque. It can be to a charity online. It can even be something as simple as sharing food with a friend or a neighbor. Let's say you're making some food, make a little bit extra and give it to your neighbor. Do something to give someone else from the blessings that Allah has given you. And if you're like, I don't have anything that I can give, if you have nothing to give whatsoever, then be generous with your smile. Smile at people. Genuinely want good for them. Go out in the world and actually sincerely and deeply from your heart look at others with mercy and smile at them. And as the Prophet ﷺ said, that a smile is charity. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq and make us people who follow and embody the beautiful prophetic way. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you for listening to Soul Food. To subscribe to the show, visit soulfood.fm or search for Soul Food in your favorite podcast player. And while you're there, take a minute to leave us a rating and a review. It helps more people discover the show.